They're letting just anyone into first class these days, huh? That's what she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, but with eyes fixed squarely on the only black woman in the lounge. Dr. Evelyn Reed had just settled into her seat after returning from delivering a groundbreaking lecture at CERN. She wasn't flashy. No designer logos, no entourage, just quiet elegance and a mind worth billions. But to Eleanor Covington and her spoiled son, all they saw was skin, an intruder in their curated world of inherited privilege. They didn't know her name. They didn't know who she was married to. And in 5 minutes, their empire would begin to crumble at the sound of her jet's arrival. The Polaris Lounge at Newark Liberty International Airport was an exercise in curated tranquility. It was a world away from the chaotic symphony of departures and arrivals echoing through the main concourse. Here, the lighting was perpetually set to a gentle pre-dusk glow. The air hummed with the low, expensive thrum of a superior ventilation system, and the clinking of real silverware against porcelain was the loudest sound permitted. It was a holding pen for the global 1%, a space that smelled of success, aged whiskey, and a faint floral air freshener that probably had a name like Kyoto Garden in Spring. Dr. Evelyn Reed sat in a plush armchair in a quiet corner, a book resting unread in her lap. She was the very picture of understated elegance. She wore no overt designer logos. Her attire consisted of a simple, exquisitely tailored pair of black trousers, a silk shell top the color of cream, and a cashmere wrap, the shade of a stormy sky, draped over her shoulders. Her only jewelry was a pair of delicate pearl earrings and a simple, elegant platinum wedding band. Her hair was styled in intricate, beautiful locks, some of which were pinned up to reveal the elegant column of her neck. She was tired. It was a bone-deep weariness that came not from physical exertion, but from pouring every ounce of her intellectual and emotional energy into her work. For the past week she had been in Geneva, not as a tourist, but as a keynote speaker at a highly specialized conference at CERN. Her presentation, on the practical applications of quantum entanglement in next-generation communication arrays, had been met with a standing ovation from a room full of the world's most formidable minds. She had navigated complex scientific debates, mentored young physicists, and finalized the preliminary framework for a project that could, quite literally, change the world. Now, all she wanted was to go home. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the hushed atmosphere wash over her. She was a master of observing, of taking in data points and assembling them into a coherent picture. It was a skill honed in the lab and the lecture hall, but it served her just as well in the theater of human interaction. And the data points she was currently collecting were interesting. Across the lounge, seated on a long leather banquette, were a woman and a younger man who could only be her son. They were the antithesis of Evelyn's quiet grace. They were loud, not in volume but in presence. The woman, who looked to be in her late 60s, was Eleanor Covington. She was sculpted, not dressed. Her blonde hair was a helmet of perfection, her face a mask of expensive cosmetic procedures, and her body was shrink-wrapped in a tweed suit that screamed Chanel without having to display a single logo. A large, ostentatious diamond necklace glittered at her throat, and a matching brick of a diamond sat on her right hand. She sipped her champagne with a permanent moue of dissatisfaction, as if the very act of existing in a public space was a burden. Her son, Harrison Covington, was a younger, masculine echo of her entitlement. He was handsome in a brutish, predictable way, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite, and a smile that never quite reached his cold, blue eyes. He was scrolling through his phone with an air of profound boredom, his Patek Philippe watch catching the light as he flicked his thumb over the screen. Evelyn had noticed their glances from the moment she'd settled in. First, a quick, dismissive flick from Harrison, then a longer, more calculating stare from Eleanor. It was a look Evelyn knew well. It was the "how did you get in here" look. It was a look that bypassed her elegant attire, her calm demeanor, her obvious right to be there, and landed on one simple, immutable fact: her blackness. To them, in this rarefied air, she was an anomaly, an error in the matrix of their privilege. Evelyn sighed internally. She was too tired for this. She had spent a week debating the fundamental nature of the universe with Nobel laureates. She simply didn't have the energy to engage in the petty, earthbound ugliness of prejudice. She decided to ignore them, focusing instead on the gentle fizz of the Perrier in her glass. But the Covingtons were not content to be ignored. "I don't understand why the standards are slipping so badly," Eleanor said to Harrison, her voice a stage whisper designed to carry. "This place used to be exclusive, truly exclusive." Harrison grunted in agreement, not looking up from his phone. "They're letting anyone in now, Mother. Probably some new credit card promotion." The comment was a dart, thrown with casual cruelty, and it was aimed directly at Evelyn. She felt the sting of it, the familiar burn of being reduced to a stereotype, the unworthy intruder, the affirmative action hire, the credit card promotion. She had heard them all before. She kept her eyes on her book, her posture unwavering. She would not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. That was their game, to provoke, to receive a response, any response, and then to escalate, positioning themselves as the victims of an unwarranted intrusion. Their next target was the lounge attendant, a young man named Simon. He was slim, with a nervous energy and an almost comical desire to please the guests he deemed important. He scurried around the lounge, refilling glasses and offering warm nuts with a fawning deference. He had been almost obsequiously polite to the Covingtons, addressing them as ma'am and sir with a slight bow. When he had checked Evelyn in, his politeness had been thin, brittle, his eyes scanning her boarding pass with just a hint of suspicion, as if he were expecting it to dissolve into a fake at any moment. Eleanor caught Simon's eye and crooked a finger, a gesture one might use to summon a disobedient dog. Simon was at her side in an instant. "Yes, Mrs. Covington, may I get you a refill?" "No, thank you, Simon," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern. She lowered it conspiratorially, yet it was still perfectly audible to Evelyn. "I am just a little concerned about security and the general atmosphere." She flicked her eyes pointedly in Evelyn's direction. Simon's gaze followed hers. He saw Evelyn, sitting calmly, bothering no one. He looked back at Eleanor, his face a mask of anxious comprehension. He understood perfectly. His job was not to ensure the comfort of all first-class passengers. His job was to ensure the comfort of the right first-class passengers. I understand, ma'am," he stammered. "Is there anything specific?" "Specific?" Eleanor laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "My dear boy, you either see it or you don't. Some people just don't belong in certain places. It lowers the tone." Harrison finally looked up from his phone, a smirk playing on his lips. He looked directly at Evelyn, his eyes traveling down her body in a way that was both dismissive and vaguely lecherous. "Maybe she's waiting for someone," he drawled. "Someone who does have a ticket." This was the moment. The line had been crossed, moving from coded insinuation to direct public insult. The quiet sanctuary had been violated. Every fiber of Evelyn's being screamed at her to stand up, to unleash the full force of her intellect and righteous anger upon them. To tell them that her ticket was paid for not by a credit card promotion, but by a life of relentless hard work and staggering brilliance. To inform them that the value of her contributions to science would outweigh their entire inherited fortune 1,000,000 times over. But she held back. An old memory surfaced. Her father, a history professor and a man of immense dignity, once told her, "Never wrestle with a pig. You both get dirty, and besides, the pig likes it." She would not wrestle. Not yet. She would simply observe. She would let them build their own pyre, stick by stick. She slowly, deliberately turned a page in her book, the crisp sound of the paper a small act of defiance in the charged silence. She could feel their frustration mounting. Her refusal to engage was, to them, an even greater offense than any angry retort could have been. It was the ultimate dismissal. It told them that they weren't even important enough to warrant her anger, and that, for people like Eleanor and Harrison Covington, was utterly unforgivable. Their campaign of petty harassment was about to escalate dramatically. The Covingtons' failure to provoke Evelyn into a confrontation only seemed to fuel their noxious sense of entitlement. They were like sharks that, having failed to get a rise out of their intended prey, decided to thrash about and bloody the water themselves. Eleanor stood up, her movements stiff with indignation. She picked up her half-full glass of champagne. With a theatrical sigh, she began to walk towards the large picture window that overlooked the tarmac, a path that took her directly past Evelyn's chair. Evelyn watched her approach from the corner of her eye. She knew with a sinking certainty what was about to happen. It was a classic move from the playbook of petty tyrants. As Eleanor passed, her hand slipped. The champagne, a pale gold liquid full of fizzing, angry little bubbles, did not spill on the floor. By some malevolent miracle of physics, it arced sideways, splashing directly onto the fine gray cashmere of Evelyn's wrap, which was draped over the arm of her chair. A dark, wet stain bloomed instantly on the luxurious fabric. "Oh, my heavens!" Eleanor exclaimed, her voice a pitch-perfect imitation of shock. She brought a hand to her chest. "How clumsy of me. I am so terribly sorry." The apology was as fake as the pearls on a department store mannequin. Her eyes, however, held a glint of pure, unadulterated triumph. She had finally managed to physically impose herself on Evelyn's space, to mar her belongings, to force an interaction. Evelyn looked down at the spreading stain on her wrap. It was a beautiful piece, a gift from her husband. She then looked up at Eleanor, her gaze steady and unblinking. She didn't speak. She simply held Eleanor's gaze, her silence more potent than any accusation. In her eyes, Eleanor was not an equal but a specimen, a fascinating if repulsive case study in human behavior. Harrison sauntered over, feigning concern. "Mother, are you all right? Oh dear, look at that, it's completely soaked." He looked at Evelyn. "You should be more careful where you leave your things," he said, somehow managing to twist the situation to make her the one at fault. Simon, the attendant, rushed over with a cloth, his face a mess of panic. "Mrs. Covington, are you all right? Oh, let me help with that." He immediately began dabbing uselessly at the stain on Evelyn's wrap, his primary concern clearly for the perpetrator, not the victim. "It's quite all right, Simon," Evelyn said, her voice calm and clear. It cut through the manufactured drama like a scalpel. She gently took the wrap and folded it, stain side in, and placed it on her lap. "It's just a wrap." Her composure was infuriating to them. They had expected tears or anger, or at the very least a flustered display of indignation. Her calm control was a mirror, reflecting their own ugliness back at them, and they hated what they saw. "Well, I did apologize," Eleanor said stiffly, her feigned remorse evaporating. "Some people are just so sensitive." "And some people are not," Evelyn replied, her voice still even. She finally looked directly at Eleanor, a hint of steel entering her tone. "They have more important things to concern them than a spilled drink." The implication hung in the air. "I have important things to think about. You clearly do not." This was too much for Eleanor. Her carefully constructed mask of civility cracked completely. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Do you have any idea who I am?" It was the classic ultimate cry of the entitled, the belief that a name, a bloodline, a bank account should grant them immunity from basic human decency. "No," Evelyn said simply, truthfully, "and I can't imagine why it would matter." "It matters," Harrison sneered, stepping forward. "It matters because this is a private lounge for paying first-class customers, not a public waiting area. And frankly, your presence here is questionable." He turned to Simon, who was hovering uselessly, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of a very expensive, very aggressive limousine. "Simon," Harrison commanded, "I want you to verify her credentials. Again. I have a strong feeling her ticket isn't valid for this lounge. People like her are always trying to sneak their way into places they don't belong." The phrase "people like her" was now spoken without a hint of subterfuge. It was a raw, undisguised piece of bigotry, laid bare on the polished floor of the Polaris lounge. The other guests in the lounge, who had been trying their best to pretend they weren't listening, now fell into a deep, uncomfortable silence. A few looked down at their laps, embarrassed. Others watched with a kind of grim fascination. No one intervened. This was Evelyn's fight, and she was utterly alone. Simon visibly paled. He was caught between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, he had the Covingtons radiating wealth and menace, demanding he take action. On the other, he had Evelyn, a passenger whose boarding pass he had already checked and verified. His sycophantic instincts, however, were stronger than his professionalism. He chose to appease the power he could see. He turned to Evelyn, his face a mixture of apology and officialdom. "Ma'am, Dr. Reed, I am so sorry, but for the comfort and security of all our guests, I'm going to have to ask to see your boarding pass one more time." Evelyn stared at him, not with anger, but with a profound sense of disappointment. She saw him not as a person, but as a cog in a machine she knew all too well. A machine that grinds down dignity and runs on the fuel of prejudice. "You have already seen my boarding pass, Simon," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You scanned it yourself not 30 minutes ago. Are you suggesting your airline system is faulty, or are you accusing me of something?" "No, of course not, ma'am. It's just procedure," he stammered, wilting under her directness. He couldn't meet her eyes. "It is not procedure to repeatedly harass a paying passenger at the behest of another," Evelyn stated, her voice resonating with an authority that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with unshakable self-worth. "It is, however, a textbook example of discrimination." She used the word discrimination deliberately. It was a word that had legal weight, a word that corporations like United Airlines were terrified of. She saw a flicker of genuine fear in Simon's eyes. But Harrison Covington just laughed. "Oh, here we go. Playing the race card. How predictable. Just show him the ticket if you have one." Evelyn had a choice. She could refuse, stand her ground on principle, and likely be escorted out by security. Or she could comply, knowing that the final, decisive act of this drama was only moments away. Her husband, Julian, was pathologically punctual. His jet would be waiting. A slow smile touched Evelyn's lips. It was a small, secret smile, one that did not reach her eyes. It was the smile of a chess master who sees the checkmate 5 moves ahead. "Very well," she said, her voice laced with an almost imperceptible amusement. She reached into her Hermes handbag, a bag so subtle in its luxury that the Covingtons had probably mistaken it for a cheap knockoff, and retrieved her ticket portfolio. She did not hand it to Simon. Instead, she held it in her hand, waiting. She looked past the Covingtons, past Simon, and towards the grand arrivals and departures board on the far wall, as if expecting something. Eleanor scoffed. What is she waiting for, a special invitation? And then it happened. A voice, calm and professional, echoed through the lounge's private speaker system, a sound reserved only for special announcements. Good afternoon, passengers. A quick announcement from the Vance Aviation Desk. At the mention of the name Vance, Eleanor and Harrison Covington froze. Their expressions shifted from arrogant certainty to confused curiosity. Vance. They knew that name. They knew it very well. It was the name of the man they were flying here to meet, the man who held the fate of their entire crumbling family empire in his hands. The voice on the intercom continued, clear and crisp. With the party for Vance Aviation Flight 777, with non-stop service to London, please make your way to the private tarmac entrance. Your aircraft is ready for boarding. A collective blink from the Covingtons. Vance Aviation? A private flight? Here? Simon looked utterly bewildered. He glanced from the Covingtons to Evelyn, his small mind trying and failing to connect the dots. Then the final piece fell into place. The lounge manager, a distinguished-looking woman named Miss Albright, emerged from her office. She strode purposefully across the lounge, her eyes scanning the room. She ignored the Covingtons completely. Her gaze landed on Evelyn. She approached with a warm, respectful smile. Dr. Reed, Miss Albright said, her voice full of deference. "Mr. Vance has just landed. He sent his apologies for the few minutes' delay. They had a stronger than expected headwind over the Atlantic. Your car is waiting to take you to the tarmac whenever you're ready." The world seemed to slow down. "Dr. Reed, Mr. Vance has landed. Your car is waiting." The words detonated in the silent lounge like a series of precisely placed explosions. Eleanor Covington's face a moment ago, so full of smug certainty, seemed to collapse. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, slack-jawed mask of horror. Her diamond necklace suddenly looked gaudy and cheap. Harrison stood as if petrified, his mouth slightly agape. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of dawning, sickening realization. He looked at Evelyn, really looked at her for the first time. He didn't see an intruder anymore. He saw a woman of immense power, a power he had fundamentally, catastrophically misunderstood. Simon the attendant looked like he had seen a ghost. His entire body began to tremble, and a sheen of cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He stared at the boarding pass portfolio still clutched in Evelyn's hand as if it were a holy relic. Evelyn finally stood up, the very picture of grace and composure. She gave Miss Albright a warm smile. "Thank you, Sarah. I was just finishing up here." She turned her head slowly, her gaze sweeping over the frozen figures of Eleanor and Harrison Covington. She let her eyes rest on them for a long moment, allowing the full weight of their colossal misjudgment to crush them. She said nothing. She didn't have to. Then she looked at Simon. She held up the ticket portfolio. "You wanted to see this?" she asked, her voice soft, but every word was a hammer blow. Before the terrified attendant could answer, a new figure appeared at the entrance to the lounge. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit, and moved with the easy, commanding presence of a man who was used to the world bending to his will. He had a warm, intelligent face and eyes that lit up the moment they saw Evelyn. "There you are," Julian Vance said, his voice a rich baritone that filled the space. He strode across the room, his attention focused solely on his wife. He didn't even notice the Covingtons or the mess on the floor. He wrapped his arms around Evelyn and kissed her, a greeting full of love, relief, and deep affection, right there in the middle of the lounge. "I'm sorry I'm late, my love," he murmured. "The pilot was complaining about jet streams. How was Geneva? Did you blow their minds?" "I think so," Evelyn smiled, melting into his embrace. "But you won't believe the day I've had just sitting here." It was only then that Julian seemed to notice the other figures in their tableau of horror. His gaze fell upon the Covingtons. He didn't recognize them at first. They were just two pale, shocked faces in the background of his reunion. But Eleanor and Harrison recognized him. Oh yes, they recognized the man they had spent months begging for a meeting with. The tech billionaire, the green energy visionary. The man they believed was their last and only savior, Julian Vance. And he was kissing the woman they had just spent the last half hour systematically humiliating. The full, cataclysmic, career-ending, soul-destroying reality of what they had just done hit them with the force of a physical blow. Eleanor Covington swayed on her feet, and for a terrifying second it looked like she might faint. Harrison's face was the color of ash. Karma hadn't just knocked on the door. It had landed a private jet on their front lawn and set their house on fire, and the blaze was only just beginning. Julian Vance held his wife, a universe of love and concern in his eyes. He noticed the damp, stained wrap in her hand and the tense atmosphere in the lounge. His smile faded, replaced by a sharp, questioning look. "Everything all right, Ev?" he asked, his voice low and serious. "You look tense, and your wrap is ruined." Evelyn gave a small, weary sigh. "It's been an educational half-hour, Julian. A masterclass in unwarranted assumptions." She glanced meaningfully towards the Covingtons, who were still frozen in their tableau of shock. Julian's eyes followed her gaze. He looked at Eleanor and Harrison properly for the first time. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, but it was distant, like trying to place a face from a business prospectus. Do we know them? Before Evelyn could answer, a new voice laced with panic cut in. It was Simon. He scurried forward, bowing and scraping, his entire demeanor transformed from officious gatekeeper to groveling servant. "Mr. Vance, sir, an honor to have you. Dr. Reed, my deepest, most sincere apologies for any misunderstanding earlier. He was babbling, his words tumbling over each other in a desperate attempt to rewrite history. Julian silenced him with a single, cold glance. It was a look that could freeze boardrooms and make CEOs tremble. Simon's mouth snapped shut. Julian turned his attention back to his wife. A misunderstanding. What kind of misunderstanding? Evelyn was about to speak when Eleanor Covington, jolted back to life by pure desperation, took a shaky step forward. Her voice, when it came out, was a strained, trembling parody of her earlier arrogance. "Mr. Vance," she began, forcing a sickly sweet smile onto her face. "Eleanor Covington, and this is my son, Harrison. What a delightful surprise to see you here." Julian's brow furrowed. The name clicked. Covington. Covington Industries, of course. "We have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning." Harrison, seeing a sliver of an opening, a desperate chance to salvage the unsalvageable, stepped forward as well. "That's right, sir, a true honor. We flew in specifically for it. We're incredibly excited about the potential synergies between our companies." He was practically beaming, a frantic high-wattage smile of pure terror. Julian nodded slowly, his mind processing the new information. He looked from the Covingtons to his wife, then to the terrified attendant, and back to the stained wrap in Evelyn's hand. The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place, forming a picture of breathtaking ugliness. "Is that so?" Julian said, his voice dangerously neutral. He turned to Evelyn. "Darling, were these the people who were giving you a hard time?" This was it, the moment of reckoning. Eleanor and Harrison held their breath. They were praying, hoping, begging the universe that Evelyn might show some mercy, that she might downplay the incident to avoid a scene. They had profoundly misjudged her again. Evelyn was not a vindictive person, but she was a person who believed in consequences. She believed that actions, especially those rooted in hatred, should be met with an equal and opposite reaction. "They were," Evelyn confirmed, her voice clear and unwavering. "They spilled a drink on my wrap, accused me of not belonging here, and insisted that Simon here remove me from the lounge because my presence was, and I quote, lowering the tone. Every word was a nail in the Covingtons' corporate coffin. Julian Vance went very, very still. The warmth in his expression vanished completely, replaced by an arctic coldness that seemed to suck the very heat from the air. He was no longer Julian Vance, the loving husband. He was Julian Vance, the titan of industry, the man who did not suffer fools, and who absolutely did not tolerate disrespect towards the person he loved most in the world. He turned his head slowly to face Eleanor and Harrison. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, yet it carried the chilling weight of absolute power. "Let me see if I have this correct," he began. "You are the principals of Covington Industries, a legacy energy company on the verge of bankruptcy. You are seeking a multi-billion-dollar partnership with my company, Vance Renewables, as a last-ditch effort to save yourselves from total collapse. Your entire future hinges on my goodwill, and you prepared for this crucial meeting by coming to this airport and systematically harassing and insulting a black woman who was quietly minding her own business." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, thick and heavy. The profound, exquisite, almost poetic stupidity of that is truly something to behold. Eleanor's face crumpled. "Mr. Vance, please. It was a misunderstanding. A terrible, terrible mistake. We had no idea. We didn't know she was with you." And there it was, the fatal admission, the confession that lay at the heart of their rotten philosophy. Julian's eyes narrowed. "You didn't know she was with me," he repeated, his voice dropping even lower. "So the problem wasn't your behavior. The problem was the status of your victim, You believe your actions would have been acceptable if she were just some random black woman, if she didn't have a Mr. Vance to come and rescue her. You feel remorse not because you were cruel, but because you were cruel to the wrong person. He took a step closer, and both Eleanor and Harrison flinched back as if he had struck them. You see, this is where you and I operate in different universes. I built my company on innovation, on merit, and on the fundamental belief that a person's worth is determined by the content of their character and the quality of their mind. You clearly operate on an older, uglier system. You believe a person's worth is determined by their name, their connections, and the color of their skin. He gestured towards Evelyn, his expression softening for a moment as he looked at her. But here's the part you couldn't possibly have understood. The twist, if you will. He turned his icy gaze back to the Covingtons. This woman you insulted is not just my wife. She is Dr. Evelyn Reed, the Dr. Reed, the one with a PhD in quantum physics from MIT, the woman who just spent a week at CERN as the keynote speaker, dazzling minds that you couldn't even begin to comprehend. And most importantly for you, she is the chief scientific advisor for Vance Renewables. He let that sink in. He watched their faces go from ashen to bloodless. The revolutionary solar capture technology you are so desperate to license. The proprietary energy storage system that is the centerpiece of our entire proposed partnership? Julian smiled, a chilling, razor-thin smile with no humor in it at all. It's based on her work, her patents, her genius. In fact, my primary reason for even considering a meeting with a fossilized company like yours was Dr. Reed's belief that your existing infrastructure could be repurposed, saving thousands of jobs. It was her compassion, her vision, that even got you in the door. He gestured around the now silent lounge. So you didn't just insult my wife. You insulted the very architect of the lifeline you were begging for. You looked at the mind that could have saved you, and all you saw was a target for your prejudice. Harrison finally found his voice, a desperate, croaking sound. Mr. Vance, Dr. Reed, we apologize. We sincerely, deeply apologize. We were wrong. Please, don't let this error in judgment destroy everything. Evelyn looked at them, her expression not of anger, but of a kind of clinical pity. It wasn't an error in judgment, Mr. Covington, she said calmly. An error is a mistake you make once. This was a reflection of character, your character, and character is the one thing you can't fix with a business deal. Julian nodded in agreement. He pulled out his phone. With a few swift taps, he composed an email. The Covingtons watched, their eyes wide with terror, as his thumb hovered over the send button. Miss Albright, Julian said, looking at the lounge manager. Please ensure the Covingtons are comfortable for the remainder of their wait for their commercial flight. The emphasis on commercial was a deliberate final twist of the knife. He then looked at Eleanor and Harrison, his face a mask of finality. Our meeting for tomorrow is canceled. My offer of partnership is rescinded. Any and all association between Vance Renewables and Covington Industries is hereby terminated, effective immediately. He pressed send. A faint whoosh sound echoed from his phone. It was the sound of an empire falling. My reasoning, he added, slipping the phone back into his pocket, will be made clear to my board and, when necessary, the financial press. I have a zero-tolerance policy for bigotry in my business dealings. It's bad for morale, it's bad for innovation, and it is, as you have so wonderfully demonstrated, catastrophically bad for business. He offered his arm to Evelyn. Shall we go, my love? Our jet is waiting. Evelyn took his arm, placing her hand over his. She gave the Covingtons one last, long look. She said nothing. Her silence was their judgment. As they walked away, leaving Eleanor and Harrison standing like statues in the ruins of their own making, Evelyn leaned her head on her husband's shoulder. The first part of the karma had been delivered. But she knew, as did Julian, that the real consequences, the hard karma, had only just begun to unfold. The walk to the private tarmac was a study in contrasts. Inside the lounge, a toxic silence had descended, thick with humiliation and the stench of ruin. Outside, the world was alive with the roar of engines and the crisp, clean air of the airfield. A black Cadillac Escalade was waiting for them on the curb, the driver holding the door open respectfully. As they settled into the plush leather seats, Evelyn finally allowed herself to exhale. The tension she had been holding in her shoulders began to dissipate, replaced by a profound sense of weariness. Julian wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his anger at the Covingtons replaced by gentle concern for her. "I will be," she said, leaning her head against his chest. "It's just exhausting, Julian. It's the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it all, the assumption that I couldn't possibly belong." "They are relics, Ev," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Dinosaurs waiting for the meteor, and tonight, you were the meteor." A small smile touched her lips. "I don't feel like a meteor. I just feel like a woman who wants to go home, put on her pajamas, and watch a silly movie." "We are less than 20 minutes from doing exactly that," he promised, kissing the top of her head. The Escalade purred across the tarmac, weaving through a phalanx of service vehicles before pulling up beside a magnificent aircraft. It was a Gulfstream G700, its white fuselage gleaming under the airport lights. A bold V for Vance Aviation emblazoned on its tail fin. The staircase was already down, a flight attendant waiting at the top with a welcoming smile. As they ascended the stairs, Julian's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. It was a message from his chief operating officer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Anya Sharma. The message read, "Just got your email. Are you serious? The Covington deal is dead. The market's going to react the moment this leaks. Their stock is already fragile." Julian typed a quick reply. 100% serious, long story. Insubordination of the highest order. Prepare a press release. Cite irreconcilable differences in corporate culture and ethical standards. No further comment. Anya's reply came back almost instantly. "Understood. Release prepped. Do you want to short their stock?" Julian chuckled grimly. Anya was always 3 steps ahead. He typed back, "No. We won't profit from their collapse. We will simply allow it to happen." He put the phone away as they stepped into the jet's cabin. It was not ostentatious, but it was the pinnacle of luxury and comfort. Cream leather seats, polished dark wood, and soft, indirect lighting. Evelyn sank into one of the large swivel chairs, kicking off her shoes and curling her feet underneath her. The flight attendant appeared with 2 glasses of chilled champagne. The real stuff, not the lounge's offering. "To meteors," Julian said, handing her a glass. "To pajamas and silly movies," she countered, clinking her glass against his. They sat in comfortable silence as the jet taxied and took off, the lights of New Jersey sprawling below them before giving way to the dark expanse of the Atlantic. They were not flying to London, as the lounge announcement had stated for the benefit of prying ears, but to their home on a private island in the Caribbean. Meanwhile, back in the Polaris lounge, the second wave of karma was hitting. Eleanor and Harrison Covington were left standing in a state of shock, the other passengers now staring at them with a mixture of pity and contempt. Miss Albright, the lounge manager, approached them, her face a mask of professional neutrality. "Mr. and Mrs. Covington," she said, her voice devoid of its earlier warmth. "Your flight to Aspen boards in 45 minutes from Gate C 123. That's in the next terminal. I suggest you start heading that way." But our bags," Harrison stammered. "Our bags were checked for the private flight." "Vance Aviation's ground crew has been instructed to transfer your luggage to the United commercial flight," Miss Albright replied smoothly. "They are very efficient. I'm sure it will be fine." She then turned her attention to Simon, who was trying to make himself invisible behind a pot of orchids. "Simon," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerously low temperature. "My office. Now." Simon looked as if he was about to be physically ill. He cast one last pleading glance at the Covingtons, the people whose favor he had so disastrously curried. They didn't even look at him. They were too absorbed in their own personal hell. He shuffled off behind Miss Albright, a man walking to his own execution. He would be fired before the Covingtons even reached their new departure gate, his career in high-end service permanently destroyed by a single, catastrophic failure of character. The journey to Terminal C was a walk of shame for Eleanor and Harrison. They were no longer the confident, arrogant masters of the universe. They were just two people, their expensive clothes now feeling like costumes, their faces pale and drawn. The normal chaos of the airport, which they usually floated above, now seemed to press in on them, loud and vulgar. When Harrison checked his phone, the first tremor of the earthquake had already hit. A friend from Wall Street had sent him a frantic text. "What the hell is going on?" Hearing insane rumors, Vance pulled out. "Covington stock is tanking in after-hours trading, down 15% already. Call me." Harrison showed the phone to his mother. She stared at the screen, her hand trembling. 15%. It was a bloodbath, and the market hadn't even officially opened yet. "This can't be happening," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "It's a nightmare." "He wouldn't," Harrison said, more to himself than to her. "He wouldn't ruin us over a misunderstanding." But he knew he was wrong. They had seen the look in Julian Vance's eyes. This was not business, this was personal. And they had made it that way. The hard karma was not just the financial ruin, which was now accelerating with every passing second. It was the public nature of it. The story was too good, too dramatic to stay contained. The other passengers in the lounge had phones. They had social media accounts. By the time the Covingtons' commercial flight was lumbering down the runway, the story, in its nascent form, was already beginning to spread. A tweet from a tech blogger who happened to be in the lounge. "Craziest thing just happened at Newark Polaris. Old money couple, think villains from a John Hughes movie, viciously harass a quiet black woman. Turns out she's Dr. Evelyn Reed, wife of Julian Vance, and the genius behind his tech. He showed up, canceled a $1 billion deal with them on the spot, and flew off with her on his G700. You can't make this stuff up. Karma is a billionaire." The tweet, with its irresistible blend of social justice, high finance, and celebrity power, went viral almost instantly. It was retweeted by tech journalists, social commentators, and thousands of ordinary people who reveled in the story of a bully getting their comeuppance. The names weren't public yet, but they would be. The business press would connect the dots with ruthless efficiency. By morning, Covington Industries would be inextricably linked to a story of public bigotry and corporate suicide. On board the Gulfstream, Julian's phone buzzed again. It was a news alert from the Wall Street Journal. The headline was stark: "Covington Industries plummets in after-hours trading as Vance Renewables partnership collapses amid rumors of ethical disagreements." Julian showed the phone to Evelyn. She read the headline, her expression complex. There was no joy, no triumphant gloating, just a deep, sorrowful sigh. "They built their own pyre, Julian," she said quietly. "All we did was refuse to put out the fire." "That's all we ever have to do, Ev," he replied, taking her hand. "Just let the consequences of people's actions play out." The consequences for the Covingtons were only just beginning. The financial collapse was swift and brutal, but the social fallout, the public shaming, would be even more devastating. They had flown to Newark as titans of a bygone era. They would leave as disgraced pariahs, their names forever etched into a cautionary tale for the modern age. The karma was not just hard. It was a complete and utter annihilation. Dawn in Aspen is usually a thing of serene beauty. The sun crests the mountains, bathing the world in a clean alpine light, promising a day of recreation and relaxation for the wealthy patrons of the St. Regis Hotel. For Eleanor and Harrison Covington, however, the morning light that sliced through the blinds of their suite felt like an interrogation lamp. They hadn't slept. Their night had been a frantic, sleepless blur of unanswered phone calls, panicked text messages, and the grim, hypnotic glow of television screens and tablets. They watched, helpless, as the story of their own public disgrace mutated and spread like a digital supervirus. The hashtag #CovingtonKarma was now trending worldwide. The initial anonymous tweet had been replaced by full-blown news articles. Business insiders citing sources from the lounge had connected the dots. The Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and Bloomberg had all published damning accounts. Their names, Eleanor and Harrison Covington, were now public, their faces plastered next to headlines about corporate self-destruction and bigotry. They weren't just villains in a story anymore. They were the named, shamed antagonists. At precisely 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, the New York Stock Exchange opened for trading. It was the moment they had been dreading. Harrison sat on the edge of his bed, his laptop open, watching the Covington Industries stock symbol, CIG, in real time. It was already in a pre-market freefall, but the moment the opening bell rang, the floor fell out completely. The stock didn't just drop, it plummeted. It was a sheer vertical cliff of red. Down 30%, then 40%, then 50%. Trading had to be halted twice within the first 10 minutes to prevent a total wipeout. Eleanor's phone, which had been ominously silent for hours, began to ring. It was Charles Worthington, the lead director on the Covington Industries board, and a man whose family had been allies of the Covingtons for 3 generations. Eleanor answered, her hand trembling. "Charles?" she began, her voice a weak croak. "Don't you Charleses me, Eleanor." The voice on the other end snarled, stripped of all its usual aristocratic polish. "What have you done? What in God's name have you done? I have pension funds, investors, thousands of employees on the line, and you and that worthless son of yours incinerated the whole company over a glass of champagne in an airport lounge." "It was a mistake, Charles. A misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" he roared. "Our primary lender, Barclays, just called an emergency meeting to review our credit lines. They're calling in our debt, Eleanor. They cited the catastrophic reputational damage and the demonstrated instability of the majority shareholders. That's you. You're not just a racist, you're bad for business. The two are no longer mutually exclusive." The line went dead. Eleanor stared at the phone in her hand as if it were a venomous snake. The social pillar of her life, the one thing she valued almost as much as her wealth, was beginning to crumble. The next call was from the chairwoman of the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Acquisitions Committee, a board Eleanor had proudly sat on for 2 decades. The conversation was brief, polite, and utterly brutal. In light of the recent news, they felt it was in the museum's best interest for her to tender her resignation, immediately. The same call came an hour later from the hospital charity she chaired. She was being systematically erased from the world she had worked so hard to dominate. Her name, once a key that opened every door, was now a liability. Harrison, meanwhile, was descending into a different kind of hell. His was one of rage and denial. He paced the hotel suite like a caged animal, deflecting all blame. "This is a setup," he yelled, throwing a $1,000 vase against the wall, where it shattered into pieces. "It's a witch hunt. Since when is it a crime to point out that someone doesn't belong? This is Vance's fault. He's an activist billionaire trying to make an example of us." He started making frantic calls to his own friends, a network of trust fund babies and sycophants. But the reception was frosty. No one wanted to be associated with him. The social contagion was spreading. He was radioactive. His phone rang. It was a blocked number. He answered it angrily. "What?" he snapped. "Is this Harrison Covington?" A calm, professional voice asked. It was a reporter from a major news network. "We're running a follow-up story on the Vance Covington deal collapse. We've received several tips from former employees of your father's company about a pattern of discriminatory behavior and a hostile work environment, with several sources citing you specifically. Would you care to comment on allegations of repeated racist and sexist remarks made to staff over the years?" Harrison's blood ran cold. They were digging. This wasn't just about the airport anymore. This was about everything. His entire life of unchecked arrogance and cruelty was being audited in public. "No comment!" he yelled, and slammed the phone down. He knew it was over. The story of the lounge was not an isolated incident. It was simply the one that got caught on camera, so to speak. It was the key that unlocked a closet full of skeletons. The hard karma was not a single event. It was a cascade failure. It was the dawning realization that the rules had changed. Their money and their name could no longer protect them from the consequences of their character. In fact, their wealth and public profile only amplified their downfall, turning their personal disgrace into an international spectacle. The final crushing blow came that afternoon. The board of Covington Industries, in a desperate move to save what little was left, had voted unanimously to oust Eleanor and Harrison from their positions and to dilute their majority shareholding to almost nothing to appease the banks. They were, in effect, fired from their own family company. The press release stated the company was exploring all options, including Chapter 11 bankruptcy, to protect its assets and its thousands of employees from the personal misconduct of the Covington family. The statement was a public execution. It severed the last tie. They were not just poor, they were pariahs. Their own company, the legacy of their forefathers, had publicly blamed them for its demise. Thousands of miles away, on a sun-drenched terrace overlooking a turquoise sea, Evelyn Reed read the news on her tablet. Julian sat beside her, reviewing schematics for a new water desalination project. There was no celebration, no gloating. There was only a quiet, somber recognition. All those employees, Evelyn said softly, her thoughts not on the Covingtons, but on the innocent people caught in the blast radius. The people in the refineries, the offices, they're the ones who will truly pay the price for their hatred. I know, Julian said, taking her hand. Anya is already working on it. Once the bankruptcy proceedings are clear, we're going to put together a proposal to acquire their physical infrastructure, the plants, the grids, at a discount. We can retrofit them, convert them to clean energy, and we can rehire most of the workforce. Turn something toxic into something that helps the world. Evelyn looked at him, her heart swelling with love and pride. This was the difference. The Covingtons hoarded their power, using it to wound and diminish. Julian used his to build, to repair, to create opportunity out of ruin. That evening, as the sun set, Eleanor Covington received a final automated email. It was a notification from the bank. Due to the collapse of her stock holdings, which had been used as collateral, her personal lines of credit were frozen, and the multi-million-dollar loans on their Park Avenue apartment and Aspen estate were being called in. They were, for all intents and purposes, homeless. Their world had not just been shaken, it had been systematically and completely dismantled, stick by stick, until nothing was left but the rubble of their own making. So what is the lesson in the fall of the House of Covington? This wasn't just a story about the rich getting richer and the arrogant getting their due. It was a stark reminder that in our interconnected world, character is capital. Prejudice is a debt that will always eventually come due. Eleanor and Harrison Covington didn't lose their fortune because they spilled a drink. They lost it because they revealed their souls to be bankrupt long before their company was. They looked at Dr. Evelyn Reed and saw a target when they should have seen a titan. They valued her skin color over her intellect, and in doing so, they authored their own ruin. Her worth was never in question. Theirs was. And the world, with a little help from a private jet and a viral tweet, delivered the verdict. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that respect is the ultimate currency and that karma is the universe's best accountant, then please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of justice, twists of fate, and the powerful truth that what goes around always comes around. Thank you for listening.